Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a stack of sources and, well, plunging right into the forces that shaped colonial American society. We want to understand how this unique culture emerged, why colonists started seeing themselves differently, from Britain, and what really pushed them towards resistance.
Yeah, we'll look at the mix of people and ideas, the impact of big movements like the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening, and where things started getting tense. There's some really fascinating details in these sources about how it all came together.
Okay, so let's unpack this first bit. Our sources make it pretty clear that right from the get-go, American culture was this blend, this tapestry of different European groups, religious, ethnic, which meant a certain amount of pluralism and idea sharing was baked in early on.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is how that initial openness was then, well, supercharged by these two big currents coming across the Atlantic. The Great Awakening, religiously, and Enlightenment ideas philosophically.
So these big movements, how did they actually change things for, the average person living in the colonies? What did it feel like on the ground?
Well, take the Enlightenment. Our sources explain it as this European focus on reason, rational thought, over just tradition or religious dogma.
Yeah.
And it really landed in the colonies partly because people were reading. There was this surprisingly robust print culture connecting them back to thinkers in Europe. Ideas could travel.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting. Thinkers like John Locke. The sources hammer this home. His two treatises on government introduce this radical idea of natural rights. Life, liberty, property, not gifts from the king, but inherent, given by, a creator.
Exactly. And you also had figures like Rousseau, Voltaire, Kant, adding fuel to the fire, pushing ideas about, say, separating government powers, checks and balances.
And that powerful concept of the social contract. I mean, the idea that government's power actually comes from the people. People agree to give up some power, sure, but only to a government that protects their fundamental rights.
And crucially, the sources really highlight this. If that government becomes tyrannical.
Then the people have the right to ditch it, to overthrow it, that idea. Absolutely foundational for what's coming. But here's a fascinating twist. While the Enlightenment is championing reason, the sources suggest this actually led some people to question traditional religious faith, which maybe surprisingly created an opening for something very different. The Great Awakening.
Yeah, it's a great counterpoint. This is this huge wave of religious revivalism sweeping through all the colonies, intense Christian devotion, real enthusiasm. It was transformative.
And you had some real rock star preachers, didn't you? Like Jonathan Edwards in New England.
That's right. Edwards was interesting because he sort of tried to blend Enlightenment thinking with this incredibly intense religious feeling. His famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Intense is right. And then there was George Whitefield.
Yeah.
Came over from England.
Yes, Whitefield's was huge. He toured all the colonies, preaching salvation, drawing massive crowds with these, pretty unorthodox emotional methods.
And the impact wasn't just spiritual, was it? The sources mention these New Light preachers.
The more evangelical ones challenging the old guard.
They were emphasizing democratic ideas found in the Bible, saying things like, being poor didn't mean God favored you any less.
Absolutely. It gave ordinary colonists a kind of biblical ballast, as one source puts it, a justification for resisting what they saw as tyranny, even from wealthy colonial elites.
So thinking bigger picture, the Great Awakening wasn't just about individual faith. It created this shared experience across the colonies, binding society together in a new way, and crucially, teaching people to push back against threats to their way of life, their perceived liberties.
It's a really interesting dynamic, because at the same time, the colonies were undergoing this process called Anglicization. They were adopting English-style political structures, like town meetings and assemblies. But this process, ironically, made them more aware of their rights as Englishmen.
So becoming more English made them feel less British.
In a way, yes. Because their goals and interests, especially economic and political, were starting to diverge quite sharply from those of leaders back in Britain. Mistrust was growing on both sides.
So what were the flashpoints, beyond just a general vibe shift? The sources mention things like arguments over land, who defends the frontier, self-rule, obviously, and trade, always trade.
Oh, definitely trade. Things like the Navigation Acts, meant to keep colonial trade benefiting Britain, felt increasingly restrictive, unfair to colonial merchants.
And Parliament, sitting way over in London, seemed to be struggling to manage this increasingly large, complex, and frankly, quite different society.
Exactly. So what's really feeding the resistance, it's a mix of things we've touched on.
Yeah.
That tradition of self-rule,
Right.
from the ground up in town meetings,
Right.
Enlightenment ideas, natural rights, social contract, giving them the language, the philosophy to justify resistance. They knew when their rights felt violated.
Uh-huh.
The Great Awakening's democratic spirit, that questioning of hierarchy,
Yeah.
and just this growing sense, this ideology that the whole imperial system was maybe corrupt, not serving their interest.
And then you get a really concrete, visceral example of that clash.
Hey.
Impressment.
Ah, yes, impressment. The Royal Navy just grabbing guys off the street or from merchant ships and forcing them into service. Our sources really flag this as a major source of friction.
It really was. For the colonists, it was a blatant violation of liberty, of their natural rights. I mean, imagine being forced into dangerous naval service against your will. But from the British perspective, well, it was seen as a necessary, even reasonable way to man the Navy for the Empire's defense. A duty. Two totally different worlds, different views of rights. And it boiled over, didn't it? The 1747 impressment riots in Boston.
Yes, a major flashpoint. The sources describe 3 days of rioting after a general impressment order. It showed just how far colonists were willing to go when they felt those fundamental rights were trampled.
So, pulling it all together, what does this tell us about how this distinct American identity formed? It seems like this potent mix, diverse people, radical Enlightenment thinking. The emotional fire of the Great Awakening didn't just create a new culture. It forged an identity centered on self-government and, well, a fierce defense of individual rights.
Absolutely. This deep dive really shows how these intellectual and spiritual movements combined with very real, everyday grievances about things like trade, governance, impressment. It all laid the groundwork for the colonists to fundamentally rethink their relationship with Britain. It built an ideology of resistance.
It's an amazing reminder, isn't it, how powerful ideas, philosophy, religion can be in shaping who a people think they are and inspiring them to challenge the status quo.
Definitely. And we saw how different interpretations of basic rights, like with impressment, could just ignite widespread anger and lead to open defiance. Makes you think, how do those dynamics play out today? When different groups have fundamentally clashing ideas about what's fair or right, what really stands out to you about the power of these foundational ideas to drive such massive changes in society?